today, we're going to be clicking follow on someone pretty intriguing. Uh, Maybe Foucault.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, their feed, it's like this fascinating blend of like philosophy and everyday life, which
Yeah.
I know you appreciate.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, given, your own interest in how those like big ideas, they kind of trickle down into our like daily routines and stuff. I mean, who else is like dropping Sartre references between like memes and Walking Dead analysis?
Yeah, no, totally. It's interesting too because it's like that blend isn't as unusual as it might seem, right?
Mm.
I think online we're all curating these identities, right? Like we're piecing together all these different fragments of what we're interested in and our values, and that's kind of what we present to the world.
It's true.
And sometimes those seemingly like disparate pieces, like high philosophy and pop culture, when you dig a little further, there is a deeper coherence there.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Maybe Foucault, like the username itself.
Right.
That's kind of brilliant. Maybe Foucault.
Yeah.
There's a self-awareness there. It's like almost like an inside joke, you know?
Definitely.
It's intellectual, but it's not intimidating.
Totally.
Yeah.
It suggests a familiarity, right? Like with Foucault's ideas. Like power, knowledge, discourse, but it does it with a playful wink.
Yes.
Like this is someone who understands, I think, the weight of these concepts, but also doesn't take themselves too seriously.
Totally. And that's, I feel like, where this deep dive is going to get really interesting because, like, when you start to connect the dots between these posts, you see, like, this isn't just random intellectual name dropping. It's like they're pointing towards someone who's wrestling with these ideas in a way that I think directly connects with their own, like, personal experiences. So, like, take, for example, this post comparing The Walking Dead to Plato's Republic.
Right.
They call it a Platonic dialogue on what government system would actually work. The zombie republic? I mean,
Come on.
yeah.
That's good.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
You're good.
And I think it goes beyond just like the clever quip, right? Like looking at their pasted text, particularly their book reviews, it does reveal this kind of potential background in the humanities, social sciences.
Yeah.
Like reviews of Didion, books on like race and politics, like Dying of Whiteness, contemporary fiction, such a fun age.
Right?
These choices, coupled with that post,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that suggests a mind that's actively engaged with these questions of social structures, power dynamics, the human condition. It's not just casual viewing. It's fuel for thought.
Exactly. And it's like this thing that makes, I think, maybe Foucault so compelling. They're able to bounce between this like insightful analysis and this like really sharp, often hilarious social commentary. Like their post about Kamala Harris.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, they say, one thing I am very glad about is her bringing fashion back into the white hegemonic house.
Uh-huh.
It's funny, sure, but I think there's also this like insightful critique of power representation, maybe even a bit of fashion theory, all kind of woven in there.
Totally. I mean, I think that single post encapsulates like so much of what makes this online persona intriguing. It's like it demonstrates this awareness of social dynamics, a critical lens on power structures, but also this refusal to just dismiss something like fashion as purely superficial.
Right.
It's like there's something more there.
And this brings us to a post that I think really kind of gets to the heart of what I think maybe Foucault is trying to cultivate online. They talk about this kind of like want to filter out the superficial engagement, right? So say, I don't want more followers for followers' sake. I want more academics and mindful tech journalists for my own public, communal, interactive sake. It's like they're cutting through the noise and saying, hey, let's have real conversations here.
Yeah, which is fascinating for a few reasons. I mean, firstly, it does reflect this desire for genuine intellectual engagement, this kind of like rejection of influencer culture that often kind of like permeates these platforms. They're curating a specific online community.
Yes.
One that aligns with, I think, their values of thoughtfulness and critical analysis.
100%.
And I think this intentionality reveals a lot about how they see themselves within the digital landscape, not as someone just seeking validation through numbers, but really as a participant in this larger intellectual discourse.
And this resonates with me, and I bet it does with you too, knowing you and your own preference for high-quality, curated information. It's like they're saying, let's ditch the surface-level stuff and really dive into the deep end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of diving deeper, there's a whole other dimension to maybe Foucault that I think we need to explore, and that is their pasted text entries. This is where we're going to start to see, I think, the person behind the philosophical playfulness, the lived experiences that I think are shaping these online interactions.
Yeah, it's like we're moving from the curated storefront into the workshop where the ideas are forged.
Yes.
Like social media offers us this kind of like polished presentation,
Yep.
but the pasted text entries,
Right.
they might reveal the raw materials, the personal history that informs this very unique perspective.
Yeah,
It's like we're getting at like a peek behind the curtain,
totally.
like, social media is the highlight reel, then like pasted text, that's where you find the director's cut,
Yes. Oh,
or
100%.
raw footage of someone grappling with their own story.
And with maybe Foucault, we're not just getting, like abstract musings, but these like really vivid glimpses into their life. Like one entry in particular, living in around time, really caught my eye. It starts with this like incredibly honest description of them taking ADHD medication. They even like named the brand Vyvanse and like how it affects their perception of time.
And it's more than just like a personal anecdote about medication, right?
Totally.
It's like they're connecting their experience with ADHD to this like broader reflection on how our perception of time is shaped by like cultural and familial forces.
Right.
They talk about their Chinese upbringing, their experiences as an illegal immigrant. It's like these different layers of their identity all kind of converge in their relationship with time itself.
Yeah. And they even call time a prison at one point, which really struck me because I think it speaks to this sense of urgency, this sense of constantly feeling the pressure to maximize the present moment.
Right, right.
And they talk about how, their family worked tirelessly in restaurants, like sacrificing their own relationship to time so that maybe Foucault could have more control over theirs.
Absolutely. And I think this is where things get really, really interesting. Because remember that like Walking Dead Plato's Republic comparison?
Yeah, yeah.
Like the societal structures, the questions of freedom and control,
Right.
these themes that we saw in their social media presence, now they're like deeply intertwined with their own like personal lived experience.
Totally.
And it's like we're witnessing the formation of their worldview in real time.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. And it's not just abstract either, right? Like they share this very poignant anecdote about being called Yikwai-san, which they initially thought meant grandson of the well-behaved because it sounded like their grandfather's name, Yikwai.
Yeah.
But then later they realized that Waipo, their grandmother's title, literally translates to grandmother of the outside.
Wow.
It's like even in language itself, there's a subtle sense of otherness.
Right.
This division between like the paternal and maternal sides of the family.
It's heartbreaking, right? Like this seemingly simple misunderstanding, but I think it speaks to this much larger experience of existing between cultures,
Right.
of never fully belonging to either.
Totally.
And this sense of being on the outside, of not quite fitting in. It's like a recurring theme that you see throughout their writing.
And then it gets even more, I think, complex because they mention this like growing tension between like the two sides of the family after immigrating to the US.
Right.
And there's even this story about a psychic telling them that they were a Nazi in a past life and that this life is their punishment.
Oh, wow.
Wild.
It highlights, I think, the weight of carrying these multiple, sometimes conflicting narratives. Imagine navigating not only the cultural differences of being an immigrant, but then also these like internal family dynamics,
Yeah.
these inherited beliefs
Yeah.
that might feel at odds with your own lived experience.
Right.
It's a lot to unpack.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's heavy. And you can really, I think you can feel that complexity in their writing.
Totally.
And it makes you wonder how much of the humor and sarcasm that we see like in their online persona is a way of kind of like navigating those complexities, like deflecting from the weight of some of those experiences. It's like they're trying to find a sense of lightness, of control in a world that can feel incredibly overwhelming at times.
Yeah, it's a coping mechanism I think a lot of us use consciously or not,
Okay.
right?
Totally.
We craft these personas online and offline to kind of like, I don't know, manage how others perceive us. And maybe even how we perceive ourselves.
Totally. It's like they're trying to reconcile these different versions of themselves, like the philosopher, the tech enthusiast, the immigrant, the family member. And it's through this process of grappling with their past, with their identity, that they're able to craft, I think, this really unique and insightful online presence.
Right.
It's like their digital footprint becomes this trail of breadcrumbs that kind of leads back to this ongoing journey of self-discovery.
100%.
I mean, it's just amazing how maybe Foucault can just like weave together these like really profound personal reflections with like witty social commentary, all while like engaging with these really complex philosophical ideas. Like they're
Yeah.
constantly making connections, drawing lines between their inner world and like the world around them.
And that's what makes this whole like exploration so rewarding,
Mhm.
right? We often think of online personas as these like carefully constructed facades,
Right.
but in maybe Foucault's case, it feels much more like we're seeing like the threads of their offline life woven into their online presence.
Totally, yeah.
And I think one of the places where this is most apparent is in their book reviews.
Oh, yeah. 100%. It's like we get to peek at their bookshelf, see the titles that have shaped their thinking. And like, let me tell you, maybe Foucault is a reader after my own heart.
Yeah.
And probably yours too, knowing your own eclectic taste. We're talking Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking, Jonathan Metzl's Dying of Whiteness, Kylie Reid's Such a Fun Age. It's like this whole mix of memoir, social commentary, contemporary fiction.
Yeah, and it's not just the diversity of genres, it's the depth of engagement. Like,
Yes.
these aren't passive reads.
Yeah.
These books grapple with some really challenging topics,
Totally.
like grief, race, class, social dynamics. And I think it takes a certain intellectual curiosity and a willingness to sit with discomfort to truly engage with these works.
Absolutely. And in their reviews, you really see maybe Foucault making these like really insightful connections.
Uh-huh.
Like in the review of The Year of Magical Thinking, they talk about how Didion's writing reflects her own experience with like grief and loss, right?
Yeah.
But then they add this observation and they say, like, you can sense the ADHD in her writing.
Wow.
It's such a perceptive comment, and I think it speaks to their own sensitivity to neurodiversity.
Right, right. It's like they're attuned to these different ways of experiencing the world.
Yes.
These subtle nuances of thought and perception that might otherwise go unnoticed.
Totally.
And this ability to empathize, to connect with others on this like really deep level, it's something that shines through in all their writing,
Yes, 100%.
both online and offline.
And it reminds us that, like, behind every screen, every username, every carefully curated feed, there's a real person
Yeah.
with a unique story to tell. And sometimes those stories can be messy, contradictory, even heartbreaking, but they're also deeply, deeply human. And ultimately, like, that's what connects us.
That's it. That's the beauty, I think, of a deep dive like this.
Yeah.
It's not just about like analyzing someone's online presence. It's about recognizing the shared humanity I think binds us all. It's about understanding that even in like the vastness of the digital world, we're not so different after all.
So as we kind of wrap up our own little deep dive here into the world of maybe Foucault, what's the final takeaway, the thought you kind of hope our listener carries with them?
We spent all this time kind of like unraveling the threads of this one person's digital footprint, but really we've only scratched the surface.
Right.
There's an entire universe of thoughts, experiences, emotions that exist beyond this screen.
Totally.
And that's okay. In fact, I think it's a good reminder that the most fascinating journeys are often those that leave us with more questions than answers.
I love that. It's like we've been given this like little glimpse into this really rich and complex inner world, but the invitation is to keep exploring, to stay curious about the people and the stories that we encounter, online and offline. Because ultimately it's that sense of wonder, that willingness to embrace the unknown that makes like life and the internet so endlessly fascinating.
100%.